Hey, sixth graders, this is lesson 7-10. We are continuing our learning about percents. Today's lesson is more about how to find the percent of any number, and also finding the missing part if you have if you have the percent and the part, trying to figure out what is the whole. And we'll that'll make a little bit more sense once we get started. I hope that you won't be able to hear my kids in the background. I do apologize. They're playing outside in the front yard, and my husband is working right now, and he's not home. So I have to kind of keep an eye on them by keeping the window open. So if you can hear them screaming outside, I apologize, but that's life when we're in quarantine, right? Okay, so number 1 is talking about this section up here. It says the adult dose of medicine is 8 milliliters. The child dose is 75% of the adult dose. So how many milliliters is the child dose? All right, so for this first one, we're going to be using this double number line to help us solve the problem. And basically right here, they kind of helped us by splitting it up into 4 equal parts. And I think the reason they chose to do that was because if you're talking about 75%, you can get there by counting by 25s. And there's 4 groups of 25 and 100. So if this is 100, here's 75, 50, 25, and 0. So our job is to figure out what would the parts be up here. Well, it says the adult dose is 8 milliliters, which means 100% of the adult one would be 8. And so how would you divide 8 into 4 equal parts? Well, I can figure out the 50% of 8 would be 4. And then if I want half of that, it would be 2, or half more of that, it would be 6. So I can see pretty easily from this double number line that 75% of the adult dose has to be 6, which would be 6 milliliters. So the next question says, discuss and complete these solutions. Now these are all going to be getting the answer 6 again. It's the same question telling us that the adult dose of medicine is 8 milliliters, the child dose is 75% of that, and then how many milliliters is the child dose? So it's the same problem. We already know the answer 6, but here's 4 more ways to solve it. So this first student says, well, 100% is 4 parts, which is 8 milliliters. 25% is 1 part, which is 8 milliliters divided by 4, which is 2 milliliters. So they're saying, well, then here's how you could find 75%, because it would be 3 parts. So in order to solve this one, they're saying that 25% or 1 part is 2 milliliters. So if you have 3 parts, you would be multiplying this by 3. So 2 times 3 equals 6 milliliters. That's one way to think about it. If that doesn't make sense to you, well, let's move on to the next one. Or if it does make sense to you, then learn another strategy. So we have this student who used a factor puzzle, and they said portion. Remember, portion is just another way of saying part to a whole. So the percent part to a whole was 75 to 100, and the whole for the adult was 8. So we're trying to figure out the missing number for the student. Okay, and the reason they have percent and milliliters up here is because this side of the factor puzzle is talking about percents, and this side is talking about how many milliliters are needed. So if you solve this factor puzzle, they got us started by putting a 25 out here. 25 times 3 gives us 75. Slide our 3 across, slide our 25 across. 25 times 4 gives us 100. Slide our 4 across. 4 times 2 is 8. Slide our 2 across. And now we're ready for our answer. 2 times 3 is 6. If these first strategies didn't make sense to you, then let's go to another one. Or if they did make sense to you, great. Let's add another strategy into your pocket. We've got this student who said M, that's our missing number, is 75% of 8. So M, I think they're saying that must stand for the milliliters. So the milliliters for the child dose is 75% of the adult dose, which is 8. So M, and then math is an equals sign. 75%, we know we can write that as 75 over 100. Of, we can write that as a multiplication symbol, and then 8 stays the same. So this is just a math problem. 75 over 100 times 8. I'm going to make this easier on myself. I'm going to make the numbers smaller. 75 over 100, you're going to see me do this a lot in this lesson, is way easier if we simplify the fraction. Our math will be much smaller numbers, because or else I'm going to have to do 75 times 8 and then divide it by 100. But if I just reduce that or simplify 75 100ths first, my numbers will already be a lot easier to deal with. So I end up with 8 times 3 is 24 for my numerator. 4 times 1 is 4 from my denominator, and quickly I can see, again, I get 6 milliliters for my answer. The next student says they set up a proportion, and they said, hey, I have 75 out of 100, and then I don't know what this, that's for the percent, and then for the child, we don't know how much they need, but 8 is what the adult has. So they set up a proportion. Now, just like I did on the student before this, their example, the book does the same thing. And before they start solving this proportion, they make 75 100 simplify to 3/4, because that's going to make your math so much better. So if we cross multiply, we end up with 3 times 8 on the right and 4 times m on the left. So we have 4m equals 3 times 8, which is the same thing as 4m equals 24. How do we solve for m? M needs to be all by itself. Right now it's multiplied by 4. So if we do the inverse operation and we divide by 4, we'll get m equals 6. So 6 milliliters. Okay, so now we did all of this. There's 5 different strategies: a double number line, talking about parts, factor puzzle, using an equation of just turning the percents and the symbols into an equation, and then making a proportion. 5 different strategies up here. So we can solve number 3 and number 4 with any strategy that we want to, but it's 2 totally new problems. So these are not related to this. They're strategies. If you like them, you can use them, but the numbers and stories are different. Number 3 says, we have to solve it in 2 ways. So we have to pick 2 different ways that we're going to do it. Okay, the adult dose of medicine is 6 milliliters. The child dose is 75% of the adult dose. How many milliliters is the child dose? All right, I think this could be pretty simple. The first way I'm going to do it is a proportion. I like that. So I'm going to set up 75 out of 100, that's the percent. And I'm going to set that equal to, let's think about this, because this is where kids mess up. A lot of kids can figure out 75 out of 100, but they mess up of where they put the 6. Some kids put the 6 on the numerator, some kids put the 6 on the denominator, and it changes depending on what your problem is. So let's talk about how we choose. It says the adult dose is 6. So I want you guys to think about that. If the adult dose is 6 and we're trying to figure out the child's dose, is the child's dose smaller than the adult's dose or bigger? It's smaller because the child should be taking less medicine than the adult is. And so when you're thinking about a percent, the 75 is smaller than the 100 because it's saying you're only having part of your whole. So the child dose is going to be on top on our numerator, and the adult dose is going to be on the bottom because it's the bigger dose. And it says the adult dose is 6. So the 6 in this story goes on the bottom. All right, now we're ready to solve. I'm going to rewrite this as 75 out of 100. That's 3/4 equals x over 6. And that is going to be solved like this, like a cross multiplication. So I'm going to say that 3 times 6 is 18, 4 times x is 4x. And if I want to simplify or isolate that variable, make the x all by itself, divide by 4 on the left, divide by 4 on the right, and I end up with 18 over 4. Now 18 over 4, I don't know how many milliliters that is. If the doctor told me to give my child 18/4 milliliters, I would not know. So I'm going to have to do some math. 18 divided by 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Subtract and I get 2. Oh, I can tell what this is. If I have 2, this is kind of small. I'm going to put it over here. 2 is my numerator, and then 4 is my denominator because it's my divisor. So I end up with 4 2/4. 4 2/4 is just 4.5 or 4.5 milliliters. All right, so that was how to solve it one way with a proportion. Now it says we need to solve it a second way. Well, I'm already telling you guys, if my answer has a decimal or a fraction in it, I am not setting up a factor puzzle. You know that about me already if you've watched any of these videos so far. I don't like fractions or decimals in factor puzzles. So I already solved it using a proportion. I think that this reasoning about parts is decent, but it's not my favorite. I don't want to set up a tape diagram. I think I'm going to do this one right here. So where I set up an equation. So I'm going to set up a second strategy right here. And I'm going to be careful about how I do this. It says the adult dose is 6. The child dose is 75% of the adult ones. So here's what I'm going to do. 75%, which is 75 over 100, of means multiply 75% of the adult dose. The adult dose is 6. So of the adult dose of 6. So this is what it is. Okay? 75 over 100 times 6. However, that's going to be big numbers. I can simplify that 75 over 100 to say 3/4 times 6. Now I'm ready to rock and roll. Going on my numerator, 3 times 6 is 18. Denominator, 4 times 1 is 4. I already know 18/4 because that's what I got right here. X equals 18/4. I already know that equals 4.5. So now I solved it 2 ways. All right, number 4 is a new problem. It says a chemist needs 20% of the 120 milliliters of a solution in a beaker. How many milliliters of solution does the chemist need? All right, I'm going to stick with these 2 strategies. I think if we go over too many, it'll get confusing. So let's just stick with kind of the ones that we already did. We've got 20%, which is going to be 20 over 100 of the 120. He needs 20% of the 120. So of, I can do multiply, 120 over 1. Now, could I make this math easier before I do it? Does 20 over 100 simplify? Of course it does. That's like saying you could have 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. There's 5 parts. So 20 out of 100 would be one of those fifths. So this simplifies to 1/5. I'm going to rewrite that as a 1/5 times a 120 over 1. And then I'm going to do my math. My numerator is 120. My denominator is 5. And what is 120 divided by 5? I don't know. Let's figure it out. 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract, we get 2. Bring down our 0. 5 times 4 is 20. Hey, we get 24. So how many milliliters of solution does the chemist need? 24 milliliters. Now let's solve it a second way. Now what I said originally is that we would stick with our 2 strategies right here, but I didn't get any fractions or decimals, so I am going to change my mind. And for my second strategy, I'm going to use a factor puzzle. Factor puzzle is actually my favorite strategy. It just doesn't always work. If it involves fractions and decimals, I hate it and I avoid it. But if it's all whole numbers, I love this strategy. So I'm going to set up in my factor puzzle my percent, which was 20 out of 100, because it was 20%. And then of the 120 milliliters. Okay, so this is my part. This is my whole. And remember, when you do a factor puzzle, it's really important that you label what you're doing. Sometimes you can put your labels at the top and then make sure that everything lines up top to bottom. I'm putting my labels on the side this time because percent I think of as a fraction out of 100. So they're going to be going like this. I need to make sure my numbers are going across. So I know I need to put 120 in here. The question is, does it go on the top or on the bottom? Well, is the 120 talking about the part or is it talking about the whole? A chemist needs 20% of the 120 milliliters. So to me, that's saying he needs a part of the 120. He needs a part of the whole. So 120 is my whole, and I get to figure out my missing number. So now I can solve this like a regular factor puzzle. So 20 goes into itself one time. 20 times 5 is 100. That's really hard to see. I didn't give myself enough space there. Sorry guys, this is a 5. 20 times 5 is 100, so I slide my 5 across. Now, how many 5s go into 120? Normally, I wouldn't know that. 5 times something equals 120, except I just did it right here. 120 divided by 5 was 24. So I know that 5 times 24 gives me 120. Slide my 1 across from here, and that helps me figure out my missing number. 24 times 1 is 24. There we go. All right, so we solved each one of these in 2 ways. Let's turn the page. This page was all about percent of a number. Now we're going to be talking about how do you find the whole from the percent and the part, okay? So before we knew the total. Now they're telling you that you have to figure out what the total is. So this is going to be using a lot of the same strategies, you just have a different missing number. So like on this one, on our factor puzzle, we were missing the part, but they gave us the total. Now you're going to see they give us the part, but we're missing the total, okay? So this story says, if 12 milligrams is 60% of the recommended daily allowance for niacin, which is like a vitamin, then what's the recommended daily allowance for niacin? Okay, so complete the double number line to help you solve this problem. Well, I can see this is broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. And I'm getting pretty good at working with fifths. And I know that going into 100, that's 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Each part is worth 20. So I'm going to go ahead and label these. We have 0%, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. Each part is worth 20. So then I have to ask myself, it says in the problem, if 12 milligrams is 60%, that means they put the 12 across from the 60, then how would I figure out these other numbers up here? Well, I'm thinking, if I ignore these right here, and if this is 12, how do I share 12 with 3 equal parts? Well, I divide it by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So that means I'm counting by 4. This part is 4. 4 more is 8. 4 more is 12. 4 more is 16. And 4 more is 20. So how do I use this to find my answer? It says, what's the recommended daily allowance for niacin? Well, that would mean that the total, the recommended daily allowance is your total. What do you have for 100%? Well, for 100%, what do you need? You're going to end up needing 20, which is right here, because across from the 100 is the 20. So 20 milliliters or milligrams of niacin is the recommended daily allowance. All right, so number 6. Number 6 is broken up into 4 parts. There's 4 different strategies. It's the same strategies as before, just different missing numbers. So let's check it out. The first student says 60% is 3 parts, right? So here's our 60%. That was 3 parts, which is 12. And 20% is just 1 part, which is 12 divided by 3, which is 4. So 100% is 5 parts. So in order to get that, the student said, well, 1 part was 4. So 5 parts must be 5 times 4, which is 20 milligrams. And that's the answer. All right, our next student does a factor puzzle, which is fine by me, as long as the numbers are whole numbers, okay? This student said a portion, remember, just means part. So part versus whole, 60% out of 100. And it says 12 milligrams is 60%. So that's why they put the 12 next to the 60 instead of down here, because it doesn't say that 12 is the total. It says 12 is only your 60%, which means 12 is just your part. So 12 on my factor puzzle is going to go in the same line as where it says part. We're going to solve to figure out the total. And then on top, they labeled it as this side is my percent, the other side, the right side, are my milliliters. All right, so how do I solve this factor puzzle? Well, 60 and 100, they both have 10 in common. So 10 times 6 is 60. 10 times 10 is 100. Slide my 6 across. 6 times 2 is 12. Slide my 2 across. Slide my 10 across. And I get my missing number, which is 10 times 2, 20. Yay, that was a nice factor puzzle. Okay, our third student said that 60% of something is 12. Now, where did they get this information? It said at the beginning, 12 milligrams is 60% of the total. So they're saying 60% of the total, we don't know this part, 60% of the total is 12. Oh, I can hear a helicopter out my window. Do you guys hear that? It's really loud. It's because I live right next to the hospital in Richland, and the hospital always has helicopters going by. Now that I have my window open today, you can totally hear it. So, 60% of the total is 12, so they turned this into an equation. 60% was 60 out of 100, of turned into a multiplication sign. Our total G just stayed the letter G. And then equals in math, right here, this little is word, just like of turns into the multiplication sign, is in math turns into an equal sign, okay? So now we can solve. 60 out of 100 times G, which they're calling the total, equals 12. Well, to make this easier on myself, I'm going to simplify the fraction 60 out of 100. And I recognize that as fifths. I see that up here in my picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 60 is my third part. So 60 represents 3/5. So I'm going to say 3/5 instead of 60 out of 100 times G equals 12. Now, this is going to kind of take your math back to several lessons ago. When we are solving equations, we have to do 3/5 times G equals 12. In order to make that G isolated all by itself and you have a fraction, you multiply it by the reciprocal. So to get rid of this 3/5, I'm going to multiply it by 5/3, and that will make it go away. But whatever I do to the left side, I have to do to the right side. So I'm going to multiply the 12 by 5/3. So now G is all alone. And the reason why G is all alone is because when you multiply something by its reciprocal, it turns into 1. 5 times 3 is 15. The bottom, 3 times 5 is 15. If you have 15 over 15, that's 1. And 1 times G is just G. That's why this all cancels out, okay? On the right side, 12 times 5/3. Well, I don't know what that is. Let's solve it. Let's make 12 into a fraction. 12 times 5 is 60. 1 times 3 is 3. Hey, 60 over 3, I know that's 20 because it's 3 parts, 20, 40, 60. Each one is 20. So 20 milligrams is our answer yet again. All right, let's go to the last student who solved it. And they said they used a proportion. So their whole was 100, their portion or their part was 60, so 60 out of 100, equals 12 over G. Now, why did they choose to put the 12 on top instead of the bottom? Because in this story, you don't know the total. 12 is the part, just like we said on our factor puzzle. So on this one, 12 actually has to go on the top next to the 60 instead of where the total goes with the 100. All right, so if I solve this proportion, I'm going to use cross multiplication. And actually, I'm going to change my mind. Before I do that, I'm going to turn 60 out of 100 into 3/5 because the math will be so much easier for me. Now I can cross multiply. On the left, I have 5 times 12, which is 60. On the right, I have 3 times G, which is 3G. So if I want to figure this out, 3 times something equals 60. I already know it's 20, but I could also say G needs to be by itself. So I'm going to do the inverse operation. Instead of multiplying by 3, I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. And that'll leave the G all alone because 3 divided by 3 is 1. So 1 times G is just by itself. And then on the left side, 60 divided by 3 is 20. So that's another reason or another method of how we could get 20 milligrams for our answer. All right, number 7. This is a totally new story. Okay, so all of these so far had to do with the story at the top. But now we are on to a new story. It says a chemist poured 12 milliliters of chemicals into water to make a solution. The chemicals make up 80% of the solution. how many milliliters is the full solution? All right, so for number 7, you could set up a proportion. You might be able to do a factor puzzle. I'm going to try a factor puzzle. I think these numbers will work out okay. So here's my factor puzzle. I'm going to have, I didn't leave enough room for myself. That's okay. I'm going to say that my part and my whole, sorry that's so tiny, it's like off my screen here. My part is on top and my whole is on the bottom, because I'm going to say that 80%, 80 is my part and 100 is my whole. Now the question is, when it talks about 12, is that 12 milliliters a part or is it a whole? So let's read it carefully and we'll decide if that 12 goes on the top or on the bottom. A chemist poured, oh, I hear my kids crying outside. I'm gonna have to stop this video. Yep, okay, time to pause. Okay, so we have to figure out if the 12 milliliters is a part or a whole. So it says, the chemist poured 12 milliliters of chemicals into water to make a solution. And the chemicals, right here, these 12 milliliters, are 80% of the solution. So this 12 goes with the 80. It's saying that 12 is 80% of the total. So I'm going to put 12 up here, and then my total is the part I'm trying to find. So now I can use the strategies of just a regular factor puzzle. And I'm going to say 10 is what these have in common. So how do I get to 100? 10 times 10, slide it over. How do I get to 80? 10 times 8, slide it over. Oh no, what happened? This is not going to be good for a factor puzzle because 8 times nothing gives me 12. What was I thinking? Okay, no factor puzzle. I give up on that. Different strategy. Okay, so instead, let's do, I don't want to do one if it has a fraction. Okay, so instead, let's do just a proportion maybe. So let's do 80 out of 100 equals 12. I already know that 12 was the part. I figured that out for my factor puzzle. And then my total I'm trying to figure out. So if I want to solve this, I'm going to cross multiply and I'm going to get, oh, I forgot to simplify my fraction first. So I'm going to have big numbers. Oh well, I'll get 80x on one side, and I'm just making this problem terrible for you guys. I should have done 100 times 1 or times 12 first. So 100 times 12 on this side, and then on the other side is 80x. Okay, so here's where those came from, 100 times 12, and then 80 times x. And 100 times 12 is 1,200 equals 80x. And then we can get dividing it by 80. So I'm going to do divide by 80, divide by 80. That isolates the x on this side, and 1,200 divided by 80, I don't know. Let's figure that out. This would have been way easier if I would have simplified my fraction first. Okay, 80 goes into 120 one time. 1 times 80 is 80. Subtract and we get 40. And then I bring down my 0. 80 goes into 40 5 times because I get a 0, and then 5 times 8 is 40. So we get 15. So x equals 15. All right, that was kind of a crazy way that I did this because I started with a factor puzzle and I didn't like it. And I think the factor puzzle would have worked out if I would have picked different factors on the outside. I think that was my problem because it didn't actually end up using fractions or decimals. And then I decided to use a proportion, and then my proportion, I should have simplified 80 out of 100. I should have simplified that to 4/5 before I started working because my numbers got so big. But that's okay. That's real life math for you. So I ended up with 15 milliliters for my final answer. That got kind of messy. All right. number 8 says, what is 40% of 70? All right, since I am running out of space here, I'm going to put number 8. My work for it is going to go over here at the top of my page. So 40% of 70, I'm going to treat this just like a simple equation, and I'm going to say 40 out of 100 of is going to be times, and then 70 over 1. Now before I do my work, I'm going to remember to simplify my fraction first. So 40 out of 100 can be rewritten as 2/5, because I can do 20, 40, which is 2, 60, 80, 100. So it's 2 out of 5. So that will be, if I rewrite that, it's 2/5 times 70 over 1. So that becomes 2 times 70 is 140. My denominator, 5 times 1 is 5. Now 140 divided by 5, I don't have that memorized. I'm going to do the work really quick. I feel like we did that somewhere else on this page. Maybe it was back here. I don't know what I'm remembering. Oh, we did 120 divided by 5. If that was 24, it's going to be close. All right. Anyways, so 5 goes into 14 2 times. 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract and we get, not 2, we get 4. Bring down our 0. 5 times 8 is 40. 8 times 5 is 40. There we go. So we get 28. All right, so number 8 is 28. And there's my work for it up here. All right, number 9. 40% of what number is 70? So for number 9, again, I don't have a lot of room to work, so I'm going to do number 9 right here. It says 40% of what number is 70? So let's do a proportion. Why not? 40%, we can set that up as 40 over 100 of what number is 70. So we have to decide if the 70 is our part on top or is it our whole on the bottom. It's saying 40% of what number, which means 40% of the total we don't know, is 70, which tells me 70 is actually my part instead of my whole. So my missing number is actually my whole on the bottom. And if I solve this, I'm going to make sure I rewrite this just like I did right here as 2/5 before I do all my work, so I don't have so much work to do. 2/5 equals 70 over x. Great. Now if I solve this using cross multiplication, on one side I have 5 times 70, and then on the other side I have 2x. And 5 times 70 is 350 equals 2x. And if I want to isolate that, I can divide by 2 and divide by 2. And then x will be all alone. And 350 divided by 2, I can do that in my head. That's 175. So x equals 175, which means 40% of 175 is 70. All right, number 10. I just have work all over the page here. I'm taking advantage of every single open spot I can get. So for number 10, I'm going to do that right here. So for number 10, 30% of what number is 120? Those numbers look pretty good to me. I'm going to try a factor puzzle. Maybe I won't mess it up again. Okay. So I'm going to do my part and my whole, and I'm going to do my percent, 30 out of 100, that's my part and my whole. 30% of what number is 120? So is 120 a part or is 120 a whole? 120 is a part, and the reason I know that is because it says 30% of what? When it says of what, that like the of what is the total. We don't know the total. So I'm going to leave my whole, my total empty. All right, now I can solve it like a regular factor puzzle. And I can say they have 10 in common. 10 times 3 is 30. 10 times 10 is 100. 3 times something is 120. I think it's 3 times 40 because 3 times 4 is 12. Drop my 40 down. And then my missing number is 40 times 10. Which is 400. All right, you guys get to hear all sorts of noises today. We heard my kid crying, we heard the helicopter going by, and now my neighbor across the street is starting his motorcycle. Great. Okay, number 11. What is 30% of 120? Okay, I'm going to solve 11 right here. So my work for 11 is going to be up here. 30% of 120. I'm going to try another factor puzzle. Hopefully I don't run into any trouble with fractions and decimals. Oh. Okay, so I'm going to do a part to a whole. 30%, I'm going to do 30 out of 100. And now is 120 on the top or the bottom? 30% of 120, if it's just of 120, 120 is my total. So that is my whole on the bottom. And my missing number is on top. So now I can solve this and say, similar to my factor puzzle above, 10 times 3 is 30, slide my 3 across, slide my 10 across. 10 times 10 is 100, slide my 10 across. 10 times 12 gives me 120, 12 slides across, and my missing number is 12 times 3, which is 36. So my answer, what is 30% of 120? It's 36. One more problem, you guys. We are almost done. Number 12 says, if 75% of the recommended daily allowance of vitamin C is 45 milligrams, then what is the recommended daily allowance of vitamin C? All right. I'm going to try another factor puzzle. Why not? You guys know they're my favorite. The question is, how would we set it up? Well, I know it's going to be 75 out of 100, but I'm going to go ahead and change that to 3/4, because I know that's like working with money. I can divide both of these by 25, and I could simplify it and get 3/4, okay? So in my factor puzzle, my idea is to do 75 out of 100. I'm going to rewrite it as 3/4, and this is obviously my part versus my whole or my total. And then it says 75% of the recommended daily allowance, which is the total. 75% of the total is 45. So what's the recommended daily allowance? In other words, what is the total? We are trying to find the total we don't know, which means 45 goes up here, because 75% is 45, so they go together. This could be a 75. I changed it to a 3, so it's simplified. Anyways, okay, this factor puzzle will work. I'm so excited. I don't see a way I can get from 3 to 4, but I do see sometimes factor puzzles, remember, you can go like this. And I know I can move from 3 to 45, because 3 times 15 gives me 45. So I am going to do that same thing on the bottom and do 4 times 15. And 4 times 15 is 60. So I solved it, which means the recommended daily allowance for vitamin C is 60 milligrams. All right, well, this lesson was full of noise interruptions from outside of my teaching area and not enough space to work on the page, so it got crammed all over the place. But hopefully you guys learned enough to do okay on your homework. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.